Ed, thanks again for coming on to Beyond. And as I thought and looked and researched your background, I just wonder if you could share with the audience, tell us a little bit about your background in dentistry and how you became interested in using technology in your practice.
Well, I graduated from NYU Dental School in 1978. I can't believe it's been 45 years already. And I actually lived at home through college and dental school. So I walked to Brooklyn College and then took the subway to dental school in Manhattan. And my dad was actually a letter carrier.
Hmm.
And the post office was about a block away from NYU Dental School. So I had a perk built in getting a ride to school in the morning.
Right.
Although I had to get in about an hour early. And there was one other guy I met. He was a class behind me. So when I was a second year, he was one. And we had a lot of time to get to know each other and chat in the lounge. And he was really into tech and sci-fi.
Hmm.
And he had a huge influence on me. I mean, he was instrumental in getting me to, um, back in the 70s, home electronics was the Atari 2600, with the little joystick and
Right.
whatnot. He said, you got to go to the next level. You got to get the computer, the Atari 800 computer. And, sure, whatever. And when, after dental school, I did a residency at the Brooklyn VA hospital, bought my own practice 3 months out of residency in Brooklyn, and got married about 6 months later. And then about 6 months after that, my wife got into medical school up in Westchester County, New York. So we moved from Brooklyn to Westchester, and I commuted, and it was a rough commute. And after about a year, being a Brooklyn boy my whole life, Westchester was like the country.
Right.
And it's really not, but that's what it seemed like. And I said, this is really, great. Why don't we look for a house here? So we found a house with a small dental practice in it from a retiring dentist, which about 5 years later we renovated. And eventually, 10 years out of school, I sold the Brooklyn office and focused fully on the office in the house, which we made into a state of the art. But when we bought the house in 1981, that Atari 800 came in handy. Interest rate climate was really ridiculous. I know people are complaining about interest rates now, but
Sure.
1981 fixed rate home mortgages were 18% and climbing. And banks didn't want to lend money because they were afraid it was going to 25. That was the birth of the ARM, the adjustable rate mortgage. So we got an adjustable rate mortgage, and we got a 1% discount, which was huge, because I agreed with Citibank to do all my banking with them and to beta test their new technology, which you needed either an Atari 800 or Commodore 64.
Okay.
Uh, and I had one, and it was very early primitive electronic banking. You can only use a few companies that they had preloaded. You couldn't pay anyone, obviously. Electric company, water company, phone company, that kind of thing. And I remember being really excited about my first session, and finding my wife studying somewhere remotely in the house and saying, "You're not going to believe what just happened." I'm all animated and everything. And I explained to her that I just paid 3 bills without writing a check and mailing or anything like that. And she, unimpressed, looks at me and goes, "How long did that take?" And I said, "It took me about an hour." And she's like, "I could write 3 checks and have them in the mail in 5 minutes." And I get, you don't get it. This is going to change the way things are done in the world. And
Right.
she's like, "You're right. I don't get it, but knock yourself out." So, over the years, I've realized that I had a gift in looking at technology, and, you know, the letters ROI, or return on investment, were not in my vocabulary in those years, but this is the process that went on in my head, looking at the technology, evaluating how much it was going to cost me, evaluating if it made sense in my practice. Was it going to allow me to do dentistry more efficiently? Was it going to solve a problem that I didn't have a current solution for? So that skill set really served me well in enabling me to add technology to my practice and to my life that didn't gather dust or wind up in a closet. I was able to successfully look at things and figure out what made sense and what would work, and worked for not just for me, practicing more efficiently, generating greater profits, but also making the patient experience better. I'm sure we've all heard the expression doing good and doing well. So this is important. And in the process, figuring out that I had a gift that I could pass on to colleagues and people who, wanted to follow my path. So when we moved out to California about 2011, which coincided with the birth of our first grandchild, and then I did a 2-year transition, during which time I sold my home and dental practice in the house to a previous associate of mine, and affiliated and did a little bit of dentistry, but didn't want to buy my own practice again after 35 years. And by this time I had started writing articles in the dental literature, which was prompted by a phone call in 2010 from Howard Farran. Howard Farran's the founder of Dentaltown, and Dentaltown was essentially the first social media site that was available for dentists, even before MySpace and Facebook and anything else. It was a place where dentists could gather in an online community and share cases that were problematic, ask colleagues about products and things of that nature. This was like in the very early 2000s, right after the turn of the century.
Right.
Facebook didn't launch until 2004. And Howard approached me in 2010 with a problem. He was an early Facebook user and he wanted to be friends with every dentist in the world. And Facebook capped him at 5,000 friends. So even though I wasn't, yet doing passing on any information to my colleagues, I quickly realized that what Howard had done was not use the correct vehicle on Facebook. He didn't use what we now refer to as a business page. He was using a personal profile, which is limited and capped at 5,000 friends.
Right.
So I helped him switch over to a business profile where he could go on his merry way and get hundreds of thousands of followers and whatnot. And he convinced me to write an article for Dentaltown in the 2010 issue. Should my office have a Facebook page? And after that, phone calls and emails came in, people wanting me to talk. So in those early years, a little more than a decade ago, I would actually run live lectures where I had connected with one of the dentists in attendance before the group, gathered their information, and actually showed workshops of 30 to 50 dentists how to build a Facebook page for their dental practice from scratch. We did it live. Now I think about it, that was crazy. Broadband wasn't as dependable in 2010 as it is now, and if Facebook went down or the institution's Wi-Fi went down, I was going to be twiddling my thumbs for a couple of hours. But fortunately, it went well. I also love to talk about technology integration in the dental office.
Yeah, that was another. Well, let me go back to Dentaltown. It kind of piqued my interest. So this came out circa 2000, 2001. What was the platform built on to allow these dentists to connect with one another? If Facebook came out in 2004, what was the sort of the underpinnings of this platform?
Well, I mean, it was a website on the World Wide Web.
Okay.
So you logged into Dentaltown, you had an account, and there were basically forums. So it wasn't like live chat like we're doing now. It was, you know, if you have a problem, Apple, Microsoft, all these, Google have user forums. So it was really an early user forum that was gated. So it was only for dentists who had to, you know, submit an application to join Dentaltown. They verified your credentials that you actually were a dentist.
Mhm.
And then you could join an existing forum with a question and add your thoughts, or you could start a new question and pose a question. You know, like in 2008, when I was buying my first CAD/CAM machine, which enabled me to make crowns, inlays, and veneers in my office, start to finish in one day. A patient would come in and walk out with a finished crown. There were two big players in the market at the time. There was Patterson's CEREC and Henry Schein's E4D. And at that time, CEREC had about 80+% share of the market. But I, after touring both facilities, really liked the E4D.
Mhm.
And I joined the forum and entered the Q&A, you know, and asked my own questions and read what other dentists wrote. And it basically supported my conviction that E4D was the way to go. You know, the CEREC was for the people who wanted to join the masses and felt more comfortable buying what every other kid on the block had, whereas the people that really took the time to evaluate the product really saw the quality in the E4D product. I'd love to share with you something that's actually taking most of my time now, and it has nothing to do with pure technology.
That'd be great. Please.
I am, as I mentioned, my bent with Revere is the oral systemic connection. And I've been, even though I'm a big technology guy, my focus in the last few years is on things that are related to the mouth that affect whole body health. So things like snoring, things like early detection of oral cancer, and things like the origin of diseases of the body, which we strongly think are all pointing to one specific pathogen in gum disease called P. gingivalis. Now, every dentist has heard of P. gingivalis, and every dentist has an inkling that it's not a good bug, but no dentist, or very, very few, really understand the connection of this bacteria that lives in the mouth and thrives in the pockets under the gums of people with gum disease.
Mhm.
Most dentists don't realize the connection between this bug and how it is, we think, one of the main culprits in Alzheimer's, heart disease, diabetes, digestive cancers, arthritis, the mind-boggling list of almost every malady that affects mankind. Researchers have been studying P. gingivalis for over 70 years. There's actually a convention, a 2-day convention held biannually about all people who spend their lives just studying the bacteria P. gingivalis.
Mhm.
And it's, you know, I think where we know there are correlations because studies have shown correlations, but understanding the pathway has been very difficult. I think almost every dentist will tell you anecdotally that if you've got gum disease, you have an increased risk of heart disease, but they couldn't tell you how it happens. We all assume that bacteria travels into the blood
Mhm.
and causes what we call a bacteremia, and somehow the bacteria in the blood is the culprit. So with Alzheimer's, same thing. The problem is bacteria can't cross the blood-brain barrier. So bacteria can't enter the brain. And even if they could, the bacteria P. gingivalis is an anaerobic organism, which means it loves to thrive in environments with very little oxygen, like the gum pockets under the gum. The brain has one of the highest oxygen tensions in the whole body, which is why if someone's heart stops, we've got to do CPR right away and get the blood artificially going back and delivering oxygen to the brain, because brain death can occur, in less than 10 minutes. And so there's more to it. And research has been stymied for a long time until the team at Keystone Bio made an incredible discovery. And I think I have the ability to share my screen. So let me, here we go. So what you see here is an electron scanning micrograph of an organism of P. gingivalis. And the arrows point to these little round spheres, or what we call outer membrane vesicles. Mm-hmm. Those outer membrane vesicles carry toxic proteins in them in large quantities. And each organism of P. gingivalis produces tons of these. Now, when we've got gum infection with P. gingivalis in our gums, it's the outer membrane vesicles that are being released into the inflamed vessels, leaving the area of the mouth with the gums and traveling through the blood vessels to outer parts of the body. Those vesicles carrying those toxic proteins can penetrate and cross the blood-brain barrier. They get into the brain, and the toxic proteins called gingipains destroy the neuronal connections in the brain and start the process of dementia. The body's response to these outer membrane vesicles and the toxic proteins in the brain is to try and engulf them using macrophages, which are part of our immune system. And that immune system response has a byproduct of beta amyloid plaque in the brain. And the beta amyloid plaque has been the focus of most of the research to treat Alzheimer's disease. The problem is, by the time the brain is filled with beta amyloid plaque, those people are too far gone, and we can't help them. So, what we've got here is an understanding of the mechanism and the reality that instead of treating, I don't know if you saw, there was a new drug approved, I think it was Monday this week, $26,000 a year. Oh, by the way, a side effect of brain swelling. And all it's going to do is minimize, hopefully, we don't even know for sure, some of the beta amyloid plaque building up in the brain. But if we target the bacteria P. gingivalis in the mouth and eliminate it, we can stop the flow of of the toxic proteins through the bloodstream going into the brain and fix the problem at its root origin.
So does this also go into the heart? Because I know there's endocarditis, and that's been
so what happens is the toxic proteins circulating in the bloodstream cause increased permeability in the vessel walls in the body. So if you have a weakness that develops in your coronary arteries, for example, as a result of increased permeability in the lining of the wall from the presence of these toxic proteins in the vessel, the body tries to repair these weaknesses in the vessel walls by producing calcifications in the linings of the blood vessels. Those calcifications, or atherosclerotic plaque, cause a narrowing of the lumen of the blood vessel, which initially presents itself as high blood pressure. If your arteries and blood vessels now start to narrow, the blood has to get through that path in the same quantity through a narrower space. The blood has to go through with a greater force, and that's the measurement of blood pressure. So in this way, the presence of these toxic proteins in the vessels cause atherosclerosis, high blood pressure, ultimately heart attacks and stroke. In the liver, these toxic proteins inhibit glycogen synthesis, which means that the body's mechanism of controlling blood sugar is all out of whack. And in the pancreas is monitoring how much sugar is in the bloodstream constantly and delivers an appropriate amount of insulin to the body to utilize and convert that sugar into energy, into ATPs, if you remember from your high school chemistry. When toxic proteins are doing their damage in the liver, all with the origin of this bacteria in the mouth, now you've got impaired glycogen synthesis. So the sugar is not being broken down as it should. And the amount of insulin that the pancreas is secreting to control the body's blood sugar is inadequate. So this means new cases of diabetes and difficulty controlling existing cases of diabetes in patients with gum disease with P. gingivalis. So now, good news, we can identify through simple salivary tests who's got P. gingivalis in their saliva. And we know that roughly over 50% of people at age 30 alone have above threshold levels of PG in their saliva. And in my age group, over 60, it's 83% have above threshold levels.
And how do people get PG? Does everybody have it? Do they have it at suppressed levels, or does everybody have it?
Pretty much. I mean, it's communicable. I mean, you share food, you French kiss someone, you share saliva with someone. It goes from one person to another. And over the course of a lifetime, as you have more contact, it's a straight line accumulation. That's why it's only 50% in age 30 and over 80% over age 60. So the company that I'm working with, and I'm working as their chief dental officer, is a company called Keystone Bio. And we've got a biologic in trials now in Australia. It's a monoclonal antibody. It'll be delivered by dentists and dental hygienists as part of routine dental therapy for people who've been targeted to need it, people who we've identified being at risk, which is going to be a huge part of the population. It's going to be more than half the population. And so instead of just going to your dentist for scaling or scraping, or more advanced gum treatments like root planing and gum curettage, the dentist at the end, or the hygienist at the end of completing that process, will squirt some of this monoclonal antibody gel under the gums, and we'll be able to eradicate P. gingivalis at the mouth level for a minimum of 9 months. Right now, you go to the dentist for regular cleaning, even if you've got PG levels. And I've substantiated this because my numbers are off the chart. I've got gum disease, even though I'm a dentist. My gums are pink. They're healthy. I stand on my head. My wife will ask me to start my brushing routine 10 minutes before she wants to go to bed because she knows how long it takes me. And my hygienist remarks, hey, you've got no bleeding, even though I've got 5 millimeter pockets throughout. But my saliva tests show high levels of PG. And my mom passed away in 2004 of Alzheimer's disease. So we've got the genetic tendency, and I've got the high PG, so I'm at high risk. So we've got the therapy in trials. We hope to have it to the public in a couple of years, that can eradicate this bad bug. There is no other way to eradicate PG and its toxic proteins. It's not susceptible to any antibiotics of any kind. No chemical rinses can eradicate it. And I think that even while saliva testing is great and will tip us off to who's got above threshold levels of PG, that's going to be almost all of our patients, all of our adult patients.
So when you apply PG as a therapeutic, is this every 9 months you have to do it as you test? Is it test, provide PG, the therapeutic, test again, or is it a one shot and you're done, or is it?
No, at this point, we think it'll have to be repeated at least annually or biannually. Now, the version of the monoclonal antibody that we're working with is a murine version. That means that it's derived from, a rodent. Mm-hmm. We've got in development a human chimeric form of the monoclonal antibody, which will be considerably more potent, and hopefully, require, smaller dosage and maybe less frequently. But what we're also developing is a vaccine. So much like we give Gardasil now to prevent, it's a vaccine against HPV. If we give that to our adolescents before they become sexually active, Gardasil is effective in preventing people from ever getting an HPV infection in their life. Mm. We think that we can develop a vaccine, and we have it in the works, that we can administer to adolescents and they'll never have to deal with PG in their life.
Well, I mean, what you guys are working on, it's a ripple effect to massive industries that are focused on heart disease, Alzheimer's, dementia. I mean, it'd be interesting clinical study, 5 years out, peer reviewed, whatever. This is sort of, I don't know the right words to describe it. I mean, what you guys are working on, if it does have that cause and effect, is absolutely huge. Diabetes, heart disease, all of it.
Mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling. Yeah.
This is massive. Yeah, that's exciting. Well, hats off to you and the people that are at the company doing the hard work, the discovery. It's really exciting to hear this, and I think this will be, in my mind, one of the more informative podcasts I've ever done. As you know, I'm in the medical industry and medical field, but what you're talking about is absolutely exciting, because we know so many people that are victims. Maybe that's too strong, but people that have been impacted by disease states. And I have another question: if it's hitting on the arterial side with atherosclerotic, buildup, what about the venous side? Because I'm in a business where we're dealing with clots, and we know in the leg, deep vein thrombosis, people get it, and a lot of people with diabetes really get it. So I'm just curious if you see any.
It increases the permeability of the vascular lining. I think I've got another slide here I can share with you. Let's see. Share my screen again. Okay, so can you see that now? That's the effect of the bacteria on endothelial cells and blood vessel cells, causing this calcification. Mm-hmm. And that's not just arteries. That's any blood vessel in the body. So, the body's response to this weakness in the endothelial tissue of the vessels means narrowing of the arteries and veins and all vasculature. So yeah, that's it's just the tip of the iceberg. We're opening eyes to researchers of all the possibilities. I'm working with another company, Viome, that's also exploring not only oral, but digestive and gut health, and pathways that bacteria suppress in the body that we think trigger mental illness and depression. Mm-hmm. There are research now pinning things like erectile dysfunction back to root bacterial infections, PG and in the mouth. And if you think about it, ED is a vascular disease.
Right.
So it makes absolute sense that anything that might be a causative agent. So, and it's funny because I worked with a couple of private offices and helped them with their marketing end. And there's one periodontist that I work with down in Pompano Beach, Florida, and we did a social media campaign about the potential link between erectile dysfunction and gum disease. And they definitely got quite a few phone calls from men coming in to get their teeth cleaned that they hadn't seen for a while.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Well, what I'd like to do is follow up with you on that company, where you're working on PG and the vaccine. Um,
Keystone Bio. And
I would love to have you back on to talk about the results and where it's going, because I think this is
yeah,
probably the most exciting thing I've heard in healthcare because of its relationship to so many disease states and
oh, write it down. You're going to hear a lot about us. You're going to hear a lot about this, and you're already going to be seeing more. You're seeing more and more articles now appearing, and this is part of my outreach now, is to create awareness of the oral systemic connection and the root cause being in the mouth of many of the diseases of the body. So most of the literature out there is vague. It just says there's a connection without um, you know, directly implicating PG. But those in the know, we'll be getting it out. We're just in the process now of completing a funding round at Keystone Bio. And once that's out of the way, we're going to focus full speed ahead on increasing public awareness. I haven't done many live lectures since the pandemic started, but I've got 3 or 4 starting March and April that I'm going to be out, and I'm also going to be recruiting KOLs in the dental industry to discuss this through their networks and their lecture circuit in the near future. So it's definitely going to be, more. It's going to be out there, and the goal is to make people aware of PG, make it a 4-letter word. Have people go, oh my God, I've got PG, in the same way that hearing they've got cancer or diabetes or heart disease would scare them.
Right. It's one and the same. It's funny. We're talking about the overall dental industry and how it's changing. I would argue with this technology, with peer-reviewed studies in PG, this will be the biggest boon to the profession of dentistry. I mean, everybody's going to want to be there every year because a lot of people put it off.
Yeah.
And I would imagine with public education, people would prioritize their oral health in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. If I could look in a crystal ball for 10 years from now, I think what we're going to see is dentistry, over the years has become separate from medicine. Dentists are looked at as like carpenters of the mouth kind of thing.
Right.
I think what's going to happen 10 years from now is it's going to be pulled um, into the health picture as a specialist a specialty division of medicine, and someone who
Yeah.
goes to a primary care physician, which will probably be in a group, probably not in a private office, for a problem like, can you evaluate me for heart disease or evaluate me for diabetes or whatnot? And the doc's going to say, well, before we do anything else, you need to see the dentist and rule out gum disease and make sure that your gum health and your gingivalis is in check, because that's influencing everything. And I can't treat your heart disease and I can't treat your diabetes and anything else until that's in check. So I see the standing of dentists and hygienists and oral health care in general being elevated to one of the primary things that we can do for our own best health.
As I listen to you speak, Ed, one thing that sort of struck me is that early on, you're a dentist, you had this sort of penchant for technology. You had some sort of a pretty bold interest in technology before it was a thing, before it was certainly accepted by the masses. And I think that's a gift, sort of seeing into the future, get passionate about something and sort of drive a process. So how do you see technology today shaping the future of dentistry and healthcare in general?
Well, the difference today is that there's been obviously a turnover. Most of my generation has either moved on or are, you know, weeding out, and technology acceptance is a given now. I mean, when I first saw digital X-ray in 1998 and immediately put it into my office, I was like the first kid on the block to have digital X-ray. And the technology was so overwhelming to me, and the return on investment was so great that I internally in my own head predicted probably 75% industry adoption within 10 years. And the reality was that 10 years later, there was less than a 25% industry adoption. So what I learned valuable lessons during that time. I learned that what worked for me, while it might work for all dentists, had to be explained to them in different ways to make them understand it. And that was probably the biggest part in my success in helping companies that are innovating and starting out now build their products to be consumer and dentist ready. You know, like for example, the problem that digital X-ray solved for me was, the big one was patient case acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
You know, prior to digital X-ray, dentists had real challenges in convincing patients to go ahead with treatment. You know, sure, there were some patients in the practice who are loyal and put complete faith and trust in their doctor, and the doctor says you need A, well, schedule A. But you know, in the real world, people are skeptical. The media has published way too many articles about dentists doing inappropriate treatment. And you know, the reality is that people want proof, you know, show me kind of thing. And to that end, in the late 80s, not too long after I started practice, I bought the first AccuCam, an intraoral camera that let me take pictures in the mouth and show people what I saw. But with X-rays, which are really necessary to see a lot of the conditions in the mouth, you can't see that with the naked eye, no matter how good your camera is. You need to really understand an X-ray. And the X-rays we had available to us prior to 1998 were like 1-inch by 1-inch X-ray. They're tiny. And the dentist would take the patient over to a fluorescent view box. And even if they gave them a magnifying glass, it just got blown up so large. So now you have patients who are skeptical to start with. And then you have to deal with their fear of going to the dentist. You have to deal with getting in line financially behind vacation, car payments, mortgage payments, sometimes food on the table.
Right.
And dentists are traditionally way down the list. But now all of a sudden this tool comes along, and I had, back in 1999, I renovated my dental chairs. I had them all fitted with 21-inch flat screen monitors. And when I took an image, it would instantly appear an image, one X-ray, one tooth, the full size of a 21-inch monitor. And now that small cavity or small lesion or infection jumps out at you and looks like a cancer. And it's easy for the patients to understand what's going on in their mouth, and no or maybe becomes yes very quickly.
Yeah.
So what was a pretty small $15,000 investment became $100K return on investment in the first year. And when I tried to explain it to my colleagues, they didn't get it. They were like, well, how are you going to pay for the 15,000? Are you going to take more X-rays? And I'm like, no. Are you going to charge more for your X-rays? I'm like, no. I said, I'm going to do more cases because I have this tool. And I saw them scratch their head, because that's an intangible that you can't measure.
Right.
And finally, I realized, hey, wait a minute. I got to learn to talk in language they understand. So digital doesn't use film, right? I mean, just like digital cameras, you use a reusable memory card. Digital X-ray also didn't use film. And I would ask them, how much do you spend a year on film? And they didn't know. They were clueless because most dentists are horrible businessmen. They don't know that cost of doing business. We don't have MBAs. They don't teach you business in dental school. And we would sit there and figure, well, do you take 2 full mouth x-rays a day? Do you take 4? And eventually we'd figure out that the average Joe dentist spent about $4,000 a year on film alone. Not to mention the chemicals that they had to change every month to develop the film. Not to mention uniforms getting stained by their assistants spilling chemicals on their uniforms and having to buy uniforms. And not to mention the fact that developing films took like 15 minutes in a machine. So you've got 15 minutes of downtime that you don't have the diagnostic information you need to complete your treatment on the patient. 4 times a day, that's another hour of treatment you're missing out on doing.
Right.
But they understood the cash savings on the film, and they realized that, hey, this machine will pay for itself in 3 years just on the film I don't have to buy. So the dentists in general, more concrete thinkers. But fast forward now to 2023, to get back to your original question, is now the generation of dentists now have grown up in the digital era. They've grown up with Wi-Fi. They've grown up with tablets. They've grown up connected to their devices. And they're looking for ways that the way everything is can be disrupted and made more efficient, made with technology, and made to work better. So today's market of dentists are more receptive. And for the last 2 years, after working independently advising startup companies, I joined Jeremy Krell and Revere Partners, the first independent venture capital company that invests only in early and pre-seed oral healthcare companies. And so, we're working with companies and picking out the best ones to invest in, and helping not only the ones we invest in, but even the ones that pitch to us that we don't invest in, helping them, bring their products along to the market.
Right. Yeah, that was my next question. What role does Revere Partners play? Because I know you got a very unique niche as a venture capital group that's focused on oral health, and it sounds like there's tremendous advancements still to be made in the mouth space, if you will. And I presume it just focuses on the mouth, or is there other elements that you guys define as oral that you also?
Well, oral can be a loose association. We're looking at a company that is formulating a method for desensitizing against allergies via a toothpaste. So in the sense that it's a toothpaste, it meets our goals of being an oral health company. But the problem we're dealing with is a bigger one, dealing with people with food allergies and things like that. So we define, oral for the most part as something that a dentist can incorporate into their practice, or something that, is delivered through the mouth.
Mm-hmm. Could it also be, I imagine there's probably tech platforms to help manage the business or the practice better?
Absolutely. I mean, we've got 5 venture partners right now. Each of us are looking at about 25 new companies every quarter. So we're looking at over 100 new companies every quarter. And for our quarterly funds, we pick 4 to invest in. And each of our venture partners have a different bent. So while I'm like the technology guy and I'm also the oral systemic guy, and I'd love to talk more about that also. Um, there are venture partners at Revere who are focused on fintech and the more efficient running on the management end of the practice. Dentistry has changed. The greatest change, when people ask me, I've been a dentist for 45 years, what's the greatest change? The greatest change I've seen in the profession is that when I first started practicing, three-quarters, 75% or greater of all dentists were in solo private practice.
Mm-hmm.
Now that number is below 30%, and a lot of that has to do with tuition. I spent $20,000 for 3 years of dental education in the late 1970s, and the average dentist now goes through 4 years of training in dental school alone, and comes out, unless they've got a rich daddy or mommy, with a nut of about $500,000, not to mention whatever they came out of college with.
Right.
And the last thing they can do is afford to build a new practice from scratch. So the dental service organization beast has come along, and corporate America has businessified dentistry and owns hundreds, these organizations own hundreds of practices, and figure out how to streamline the efficiency of the practice and run the practice at the lowest overhead possible. So, we have maybe 25-30% max now dentists in solo private practice.
It's kind of where medicine is sort of migrated. Like if you look at hospitals, they'll have groups, and neurosurgeons or interventional radiologists work for the hospital. So therefore, what they can make changes, right? If you're a solo practitioner, you can ostensibly make more, but if you have the overhead or the debt, probably makes it pretty challenging. So for those people that are in those groups and they're no longer solo practitioners, if you're thinking about going into dentistry, is there a good return on that investment? Is there a good opportunity to make a salary commensurate with your education, or do these groups sort of absorb the salary in lieu of, hey, we're taking care of everything else, the insurance, any liability? I mean, how does that work if you're a dentist coming in saying, hey, I want to be a dentist, but will I be able to make money in this profession?
Yeah, so I mean, you hit the nail on the head here. We're changing. Things are changing on a daily basis. I mean, and I live out in the Bay Area, and Stanford Hospital, starting January 1, just announced that they're not participating with any PPOs. And that's huge. That's huge. And I think what it comes down to, although I don't have 100% confirmation on this, but I mean, most of us have had the experience where we go for an expensive medical test, an MRI or something like that, and we look at our insurance EOB and the bill is like $10,000, and the insurance company pays some ridiculous amount, like $600 to the hospital or the radiology center, and we've got to copay $69 or something like that. And the net result is that many doctors are fleeing. They're leaving Stanford for places where they can, get fairer reimbursement in their eyes. So in dentistry, I think we were slower to be affected, but now we're in the full, brunt of this right now. And whereas when I was a dentist, or thinking about career choices growing up in Brooklyn, if you were smart, your parents steered you to become a professional.
Mm-hmm.
Be a doctor, be a lawyer, be, an accountant, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't super expensive to get the degree if you were smart, and you had a job which would pay you a dependable living, and you'd be comfortable for the rest of your life. But the reality is now that dentistry, with its tremendous overhead is not viable, from a pure business point of view. Well, the good side of that, which is also the bad side, is that we're going to have fewer people going into dentistry and medicine.
Mhm.
With the good side being is that the people who do go into it are going to be people who are really passionate about it.
Right.
Not people who are going into a career they know nothing about with the desire to just make a good living.
Right.
So um, we've got to work it out. I think there'll be, we've already seen signs of some endowments coming in where tuition is going to be free, to incentivize more quality students to follow these career paths. DSOs have kind of figured out how to deliver a quality compensation package to attract good dentists that involves a comfortable salary, payback of student loans, covering malpractice insurance, things like that. So, today's and tomorrow's dentists are not going to be the entrepreneurs that I was. They're going to be more employee type dentists, but hopefully doing what they love to do and delivering quality dental care to the public.
Absolutely. That's great insight. So, as I'm sure the audience would like to learn more about, as the father of one of the most successful entrepreneurs of our time, what has it been like watching Mark's journey with Facebook?
Well, that was new to me, but there are lessons to all of us. The similarities we had is that we're both sort of entrepreneurs, and it's been pretty fascinating learning about how a company grows from scratch, the roles that venture capital plays in supporting and funding a company, and I've used that information to help me advise startups. One of the challenges that I faced in helping startups, I mean, I can help them craft their business plan, and I can help them steer them to other professionals that might help them grow their businesses. But ultimately, all startups reach a point where they need funding.
Right.
And my youngest daughter, Ariel, is in venture capital. She was working back half a dozen years ago for Kleiner Perkins, which is one of the big venture capital companies in the Bay Area. And when I went to her, she said, well, we as a firm don't really look at companies that are in the dental space. Occasionally they may look at one or two, but they don't have a focus on that. But she introduced me to a couple of companies in the Bay Area that did have a medical focus. And most of them were focused on companies with product and revenue existing, help them grow to the next level. They weren't looking for like the Facebook type of 100x, 1000x return on your money. So that made it really hard to find funding for these startups. So, that's part of where Jeremy Krell, who's the founder of Revere Partners, was the chief dental officer for Quip, the toothbrush and tooth and company that kind of piggybacked onto the success of Harry's razors. Kind
Sure.
of give out the product for a very low cost, get the customer into a subscription basis for the blades, or in the case of Quip, the handles on the toothbrush. And we both experienced the same frustration with the companies we were advising. So, Facebook's was a little different because they had companies clamoring to throw money at them. And I remember asking my son at one early stage, you don't need money. Why do you keep taking funding? And he answered me that it was a great way to establish a current valuation and give validity to your company's value at various stages in its growth to the investing community.
Great insight. It's funny. I was listening to Elon Musk talk before 2008 and things went crazy. He said in Tesla, he goes, we are getting checks from people investing in the company, hitting their bank account, and they didn't know where they were coming from. So they had to backtrack and figure out who's placing these investments and then do the paperwork, which I was trying to get my mind around. And could you imagine working with a company and it's so hot that you just throw your money that direction? Then, of course, everything fall off the cliff. But that's
Well,
it.
yeah. I mean, I remember in, I want to say middle 95, 96, 97 era when AOL, America Online, was the hottest stock. I
Yeah,
mean, people were begging and borrowing their brokers to get in on any new rounds of the stock that was available, paying any price. The stock kept doubling and tripling and splitting, and fortunes were made and then lost.
right.
I mean,
Literally lost.
things got so bad that one broker told me the story that I think it was the year 2000, right before the bust, that his clients were calling him up saying, I want IPOs. He goes, well, what kind of IPO do you want? He goes, well, anything. Any IPO that comes out, I want. And he would get an IPO for a company and he'd tell the client, I can get you $25,000 of XYZ company. And the client goes, I'm in. He goes, don't you even want to know what their product is? No, I'm in. And of course, that kind of insanity fueled the big crash that
Right,
occurred in tech at that point in time.
right.
So, you know, I think things have changed quite a bit, but in many ways, when you get a stock like Tesla or something like that, that's on this tremendous upward trajectory, you have the same thing. The lemmings still follow, and people don't want to be bothered with trivialities like, the metrics and the numbers and whatnot. They just want everybody else is buying, the stock's going up, I'm in.
I'm in. Right, right. Well, that's interesting advice from Mark on valuation and how to think about bringing money in and kind of the projection that people experience within the company. And I remember when they went public at Facebook, it was hovering, and then it took off, and then there was a whole question at that time about how do you make revenue in this company, and then of course the ads, and it's a fascinating business model to look at, that it went from its inception to where it's at today, which is just mind-boggling. And then that growth along that spectrum of change, and as years go by, as you have to employ new strategies because there's competition, or the technology is changing, or you've got TikTok where you got an attention span of what, a half a second, and then you're on to the next one. So it's fascinating how fast technology evolves, and the ability to stay on top of it and ahead of it is really a gift.
It is a gift, and I think that's Mark's biggest skill set is knowing what people want, and even before they know themselves. And right now, obviously, the company focus is on virtual reality, and with they're investing a lot in the metaverse, and there's a lot of people out there that are skeptic. And he's usually been right in the past, admittedly slow on certain things like getting into mobile, and there have been stumbles, and Wall Street right now is super skeptical. The stock's lost 2/3 of its value in the last year. But who knows what the future holds? I'm betting on him.
Yeah, it's funny when you said about virtual reality. It's like, I would argue, are we living in a simulation? I mean, I saw this incredible YouTube video from a guy who basically demonstrated with elements and particles, and this test they ran, that particles would change their feature once it was under observation. So you can make the argument that maybe there's a grand design behind it all anyhow, and maybe virtual reality is just an extension of what's really happening. I mean, because most people live in a kind of a virtual reality of their own making, right? And so I think you're right. I bet that in the future, his bet's correct, and everything takes time, right? It's not going to happen right away. It takes time to get there. Like what you were saying about dentistry. It's like,
and life is still the same though, even with technology. So in the few minutes we have left,
is there anything that we haven't covered that you'd like to share with the audience in closing?
Um, now I just, encourage people to take charge of their own health. Those who are not, who may have spurned their dentist's recommendation of a treatment for periodontal disease, um, I urge them to reconsider and go back. It's probably the single best thing you can do is maintain optimal gum health for the health of your body, and ask your dentist about P. gingivalis. It'll be a way to know if your dentist is really up on what they should be, and ask them to get tested for it. I mean, the public can reach out directly to some companies, like one of the companies at Revere that we work with is a company called Bristle Health.
Mm-hmm.
They're a B2C company, so you can actually go online to Bristle Health and buy a saliva kit, spit in a tube, mail it back to them, and they'll give you a complete breakdown of the microbiome in your mouth, including P. gingivalis. They don't quite put the emphasis on PG that I would like to see. A company I like better is a company called Direct Diagnostics. They have a salivary test called the HR5, where they have identified the 5 key bacteria in gum disease. Of course, PG is one of those. And they focus on those 5 and determine your risk based on your performance on this salivary test. But they, and I appreciate this, they work only through dental offices. So you'd have to get that salivary test through your dental office.
Which makes sense, which is the way I prefer to do it.
But the reality is, while a salivary test is important, what we really need to know is not just do I have PG in my saliva, but do I have toxic proteins circulating in my bloodstream? And we can't tell that from a salivary test. We need a blood test for that. And Keystone Bio has in development not only the monoclonal antibody that will treat PG at the gum level, and a vaccine that we have in our pipeline to give to young people, but we're also developing a diagnostic blood test where the same monoclonal antibody will react with the circulating toxic proteins of PG, and determine from a blood test who really is at risk and needs this treatment badly. And the last convincing piece I will throw at you, Ben, before I leave, is a study that looked at 100 brains, an autopsy of 100 brains of people who died from Alzheimer's disease. In 100 out of 100 brains, the toxic proteins of PG were found in the brain.
Fascinating. Interesting. Well, here's a hoping it goes really fast in the startup. I'm glad you got your round of funding. I'm sure you guys are working like scalded dogs there to get this out, but very exciting development. And this is definitely one of the ones I want to keep an eye on and keep track of, because I think this is fundamental to health. And I like where your crystal ball sees this going, because I couldn't agree more. What you told me, it reminds me of a doctor. If you have PG and you're not dealing with the oral health, it's sort of like you have a faucet in a sink that's running over, and you got a doc trying to mop up the water, and you got to turn the water off. And that's kind of like
that's a terrific analogy, and one that I've used.
Yeah.
I actually go a little bit further, where I talk about you living on the second floor, and you go on vacation, and you got this slow leak, and then the sink clogs. And then ultimately the sink overflows, spills out onto the floor. And because you're on vacation, it now seeps through the roof. Okay. Yeah. And it's causing a mess on the first floor. It's going through the ceiling, dripping down to the first floor. So I liken what these companies, these drugs that clean up the beta amyloid plaque a little bit are doing, these current Alzheimer's therapies available, are like putting a mop to the mess on the first floor. They're not even dealing with the mess on the second floor, And then we had one company which has failed, which was, they had a pill. The name of the company was Cortexime. They had a pill that targeted these toxic proteins circulating in the bloodstream. So it was a pretty good approach. They're the only other company that realized that the toxic proteins of P. gingivalis are the key to systemic disease.
Right.
But they weren't. There's 151 different types of toxic proteins, and they were only targeting one subset of them. And their pill was toxic to the liver, so it just didn't work. But they still weren't stopping the flow of toxic proteins from the mouth. So the best they were doing was mopping the mess on upstairs.
Yeah. Great
Keystone
analogy.
Bio is the only one that's fixing the drain.
Love it. Ed, just an incredible podcast. Thank you for your participation. And I really look forward to following up with you on progression of this exciting company.
Take care, Ben. Thanks for having me.